This is the Ford EcoSport, and for the longest time, if you didn't have an EcoSport in a compact SUV comparo, or worse, the EcoSport did not win a compact SUV comparo, this is what would happen.
Music.
If this channel stands for thrill of driving, this SUV should be there.
Even after it's discontinued, it is still a benchmark for new kids.
Once you know what Ford offers you, you don't care about shitty gadgets like wireless charging, air purifiers, and Type-C ports.
EcoSport can eat Sonet and venue for breakfast.
क्या बात कर रहे हैं?
There is no comparison with the EcoSport.
Dynamics. Ford EcoSport. Hell yeah.
Nothing beats the EcoSport. Not justified.
EcoSport is like fine whiskey.
Welcome to Gone But Not Forgotten, where we're looking back at the Ford EcoSport and trying to understand where all those Ford fanboys, where all that crazy fanaticism originates from. And of course, you know the drill. Before we go ahead, don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay notified for all our video drops, including our Gone But Not Forgotten series. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share this video with like-minded enthusiasts. Ford enthusiasts. The EcoSport story goes back to 2012, a day before the Auto Expo. Ford's global CEO, Alan Mulally, the guy who actually saved Ford from bankruptcy, he was in India to take the wraps of the EcoSport concept. The concept was obviously a star of the expo. And remember, back then, the compact SUV class, that did not exist. This was a very important car for Ford. This was a car that was made for India, but it was not designed only for India because this was going to be sold all over the world. South America, Brazil was another big market for the EcoSport. In fact, the Made in India EcoSport was exported all over the world. And crucially, for India, this was under 4 meters in length. Those days we had only compact sedans, which was a sedan with a boot chopped in half. This was the first compact SUV, and that allowed it to be priced extremely well when it was launched later on in the year. 5.59 lakhs, that was the starting price for this compact SUV. An SUV at that price did not exist, and Ford sales took off like a rocket. Now, to qualify for the small car excise duty regulations, Ford needed an appropriate engine. Now, the Figo engine was there, but that would not have cut the mustard in the EcoSport. It would have been too underpowered. The 1.4 diesel was there, and that really did the meat of the volumes. We'll talk about that in a bit. But this being Evo India, we have to talk about this engine, the EcoBoost. 1 liter, 3-cylinder, direct injection, turbo petrol. This had performance, and that really suited the dynamic character of the EcoSport. Let me start with a bit of perspective from the time when the EcoBoost was actually launched in India. Now, we did have the Polo GT TSI. That was a 1.2-liter turbo petrol engine with a DSG gearbox. The EcoBoost, this was the smallest capacity turbo petrol engine, 1 liter, 3 cylinders. It had a cast iron block for better NVH, and it was mated to a manual transmission. The Polo only got the DSG. This had a manual transmission. So for an enthusiast who enjoys manual gearboxes and wanted the performance of a small capacity turbo petrol, the EcoSport with the EcoBoost engine, that was the pick. Now, this engine, it was imported, and that meant that the EcoSport with the EcoBoost engine was expensive, which is why they also had the 1.5 liter naturally aspirated engine that came in from the Fiesta, which was not really selling well at all. But they took the engine from there. That also got the option of a twin clutch automatic gearbox, a DCT gearbox on that 1.5. The EcoBoost, a 6-speed manual. This 999cc engine, 999cc engine, it made 123 bhp, 170 Newton meters of torque. That's a lot of power from such a small engine. It did 0 to 100 in 12.2 seconds. And if you had slightly wet or slippery roads, it would torque steer in first and second gear. The big talking point about this EcoBoost engine was its size. The entire block of the engine had a footprint the size of a sheet of A4 paper. It was cast in iron, not aluminum like most modern engines, and Ford found that iron did the job perfectly well at such a small size without too much of an offset in weight. The EcoBoost also featured an innovative exhaust manifold design which allowed for the exhaust gases to be water-cooled. This allowed for the small, low inertia turbo to be bolted directly to the head, and the benefit of a small turbo is that it spools up easily for providing good low-end power and strong mid-range and minimal lag. Direct injection improved combustion efficiency, while variable valve timing controlled both the intake and exhaust cams. To offset the three-cylinder's typical vibrations and harshness, Ford used an unbalanced flywheel and crank pulley, and that offset the vibrations of the three-cylinder engine. In fact, the refinement of this engine even today is actually a strong point. Unlike the Figo, which was developed in Australia for emerging markets, the EcoSport was developed in Brazil for more mature markets, and it reflected in the way it handled the dynamic capabilities of this little SUV. Ford were always known for making good handling vehicles, which also delivered on ride comfort, and the EcoSport was no different. In fact, that is the main reason why the EcoSport still has this loyal fan following, because of the way it handled, because of the enthusiasm of the chassis. Even with the diesel engine, this was a good, fun little vehicle to drive. The EcoBoost engine, unfortunately, was the least popular in the entire EcoSport lineup. Because of the cost, also it was not very fuel efficient. In fact, that 1.5 litre engine, even though it did not qualify for the excise duty regulations because it was made in India, Ford managed to price it lower than the EcoBoost, and that's why this engine didn't sell that well. And that's as good a time as any for us to swap into the EcoSport that actually formed the bulk of all sales. And that was the 1.4 litre diesel. The EcoSport was launched in June of 2013, and within 30 days, Ford garnered 60,000 bookings. Waiting lists stretched from anywhere between 4 to 12 months. In fact, a couple of months after bookings were opened, Ford dealers stopped taking orders because so many orders were coming in. In fact, there were stories of lines around Ford dealerships of people desperate to get a look at the EcoSport. The EcoBoost might have been bringing in all the eyeballs, but it was the diesel that was bringing in the numbers. Do you remember once upon a time, Motorola, they used to make phones, and they had a flip phone called the Moto Razr, which actually was very popular when I was in college. The design of the instrument panel, especially the center console, this was inspired by that Moto Razr phone, which today it looks very congested. Like having an entire number pad out here is like a forest of buttons. In fact, buttons far too many. But in those days, this was cutting edge design. Today, it is interesting. You stick a millennial into this, or what is the next generation? I don't know what is it called also. But maybe you put a youngster in this and they'll wonder why there are so many numbers and why is there a keypad on this car. And it's not like Ford skimped on features. Every update on the EcoSport, it got all the latest generation tech. In fact, the last update on the EcoSport also got Apple CarPlay and everything. So there was nothing really lacking. It also had that Ford Sync and the SOS call button. And I think that was used because when Ford did their media drives in Goa, one of the cars over there at the media drives, it had an accident and they had to use that SOS call function, which worked. It actually worked very well. Now, as you might already have summarized, this is the diesel. There's no hiding the fact that this is a diesel. It sounds like a diesel, it feels like a diesel. It made 90 bhp of power, which is actually pretty decent for a diesel engine, even today, and back then it was more than enough. In terms of fuel economy, over 20 kmpl, drive it as you wish. So excellent in terms of range, in terms of economy, refinement, not too bad at all. This is really what drove volumes for the EcoSport. I can see why. There's no getting away from the fact that a diesel, even today, is actually a very nice powertrain to use. It's only this whole emission norms that have been killing diesels. But Ford's diesel was actually a very good diesel, the TDCI diesel. And it only got a manual gearbox, this 5-speed manual gearbox. No AMT, no CVT, no torque converter, no DCT, no nothing. Only got a manual gearbox. But again, we're talking about 2013. In 2013, nobody was really hung up on having automatics. a turbo petrol was a novelty, maybe too far. But the diesel, it hit the sweet spot. I must also talk a little bit about Ford's quality, reliability, and the service costs. I remember very clearly Ford's then India head, he really impressing the fact that Fords cost less than Maruti's to run. They had all sorts of data, everything was there laid out very transparently in front of us, and that proved that maintaining a Ford was actually cheaper than maintaining a Maruti. And I can tell you that is a fact. Even today, now that Ford is not there, but even today, you can go to one of the old Ford dealers, they still have the Ford signage, and they will still take care of your car. And that's the reason why cars like the Endeavour, they've not only held value, they've appreciated in value. And Ford, even though they've left the country, they still have a very good reputation amongst people who own their vehicles. You really have to commend Ford for what they did on the service front and also in taking care of their customers. In 2017, Ford did a facelift on the EcoSport. So as you can see, it got new headlamps, a new grille, but more importantly, it got a new engine, the 1.5-liter Dragon petrol engine. This was a 3-cylinder engine. It's still focused on being compact. It had a 10% improvement in power compared to the earlier 1.5 4-cylinder NA naturally aspirated engine. It got a 7% improvement in fuel economy, 7% improvement in torque, and most importantly, that engine was produced at Sanand, the new manufacturing facility in Gujarat. Ford invested $1 billion into that state-of-the-art manufacturing facility, which they finally sold to Tata Motors when they exited India. Ford claimed over 1,600 updates were made to the EcoSport in this midlife refresh, which included this new floating infotainment screen. So gone was that Motorola Moto Razor inspired center console. In came a proper floating screen with Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. It also got Ford's new Sync 3 connectivity suite. But rest of the dash, all of that remained the same. The engine, that promised better fuel economy, and it also got a new automatic gearbox, which was a torque converter, unlike the DCT on the earlier 1.5 engine. This 1.5-liter Dragon engine, it made 121 bhp, 150 Newton meters of torque. So it was a good step up from that earlier 1.5 engine. And even though this is a 3-cylinder engine, it doesn't feel unrefined. Same with what we said when the Polo got the 1-liter TSI engine. That 3-cylinder, it actually gives it a character. It's not as smooth as a 4-cylinder. You feel a bit of that irregular idle in the 3-cylinder engine. But it also gives it a kind of sense of character. The new Dragon engine got twin camshafts, variable valve timing, a lightweight aluminum block, a belt-driven primary drive system, and a balancer shafts to reduce vibrations. You also got the option of a torque converter automatic, not the twin clutch automatic, or a 5-speed manual gearbox. And to be honest, this 5-speed manual gearbox, the shifts are actually better than on the earlier EcoSport. So they did improve on this gearbox as well. Now you got to remember that we are in 2017. Everybody and their uncle had figured out that you had to have a compact SUV if you want to grow volumes in India. So Maruti had the Brezza, there was the Venue, the Sonet, the XUV300, the Nexon. So a whole bunch of new rivals, all with modern engines, and of course a focus on improving in terms of the infotainment, the quality, everything, the entire offering. Ford, even though they had a new engine in the 2017 update, otherwise mechanically this was unchanged. The platform was the same, everything was the same. Now, the EcoSport, it never had a lot of space. And when you had the Nexon, you had the 300, well, those compact SUVs were actually pretty spacious. You step into the back of the EcoSport, it is not all that spacious. And secondly, the newer compact SUVs that were winning comparison tests, they also outdid the EcoSport in terms of dynamics. They obviously had figured out the strengths of the EcoSport and they incorporated it into their own products. And that's why the EcoSport, at least at Evo, it was not winning any comparison test. That's why also a lot of the hate comments in our comments section. But fact is fact, the EcoSport no longer set the dynamic benchmark. It was still a sporty little car to drive, but it was not the best compact SUV in the market. Ford definitely needed something more. But not something that we expected would happen.
When it shut down production in the country.
By 2020, every manufacturer of significance had a compact SUV. There were 10 compact SUVs in the market. And how did Ford respond? Well, they responded by doing absolutely nothing to the EcoSport. In 2018, there was a Signature Edition. In 2019, there was a Thunder Edition. In 2020, because BS6 emission norms came, the EcoBoost engine could not meet those emission norms. And so the EcoBoost was canned. In 2021, they lost the spare wheel and there was the EcoSport SE. It just wasn't enough to sustain sales in the face of the competition. In fact, in fiscal year 2020, EcoSport sales were 37,800, which accounted for nearly half of all of Ford's sales from 2 manufacturing plants. That was unsustainable. Mahindra were going to come in as a savior, but that partnership fell apart, and then we all know what happened. In September of 2021, Ford pulled the plug on India. No EcoSport, no Endeavour, no Ford in India. But if you think back, the EcoSport, it was the pioneer. It was the first compact SUV in the country. Even today, you drive an EcoSport, you drive the Dragon, forget the EcoBoost, which is very nice. You drive the Dragon and you'll be really impressed. The engine is nice, the car rides well, handles well. It's not best in class. Don't get me wrong, but it is not best in class, but it still feels nice. If only the EcoSport had been updated in a timely fashion. If Ford had looked at all the other compact SUVs that were coming in and upgraded the EcoSport to tackle the competition, this would have continued to sell, because as you all know, Ford fanboys, they are plenty. People do really trust in Ford, and Ford really have maintained their brand standing. Even today, you can go and service this at any of the Ford service outlets and they will take care of the car. It still doesn't cost that much to take care of any Ford. Forget the Endeavour, even the EcoSport doesn't cost that much to take care of. Ford really did their groundwork, they did their homework, but they didn't really tackle the competition, and that's why we don't have Ford, we don't have EcoSport, we don't have Endeavour, we have nothing. Maybe Ford will come back. There's a lot of talk of Ford coming back. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, share this video with like-minded enthusiasts, and let us know what your thoughts are on the EcoSport. Could the EcoSport have continued in the wake of all the other compact SUV rivals? Let us know in the comments. Thank you.
Useless video.
Nothing beats the EcoSport.